I was 24 the day my sister told me I was jealous of her. She said it with that smiling, almond-eyed sweetness that always fooled the room but never fooled me. And I stood there in a hallway of mirrors and orchids and felt my face burning in the reflection. "Don't glare like that, Maya," Sienna said. "It creases your forehead." "I'm not glaring. You're worrying then. It reads the same. Just..." She lifted a hand, careful not to smudge the makeup a professional artist had airbrushed into impossible perfection. "Just don't do anything to make today about you. Please, you know how Auntie Bina is. She'll sniff out any hint of drama and turn it into a TED Talk over shrimp cocktail." "I'm holding a bag of safety pins," I said. "I'm the opposite of drama." Behind her, in the suite's long mirror, I could see the full spectacle. Sienna in her peony white gown with a bodice sewn from a million sequins that looked like fish scales. A veil that cascaded like a river, a crown of pearls. The bridal suite at the Halcyon Hotel was a greenhouse of white orchids and chilled champagne and anxious women. Bridesmaids teetered in heels that were actually engineered weapons. Our mother, draped in a sari that could blind you from 20 feet away, was issuing orders into a phone and a Bluetooth earpiece simultaneously. The day outside was clear and blue, the ocean just beyond the terrace braided by gulls. Everything smelled like roses and hairspray and victory. I stood in flats and an ice blue dress chosen because the maid of honor should flatter the bride, not distract. It was practical, an unusual adjective for a dress, but I loved it because it hadn't made me suck in my stomach to zip it. Practical, too, were the safety pins in my bag. The stain remover pen, the Band-Aids, the spare bobby pins, the tiny sewing kit, anyway, Sienna said, smoothing her skirt so the fabric lay like a sheet of still water. "I saw the guest list again this morning. Guess who RSVP'd yes? Rowan Hale, he's here. Can you believe it?" I blinked. "The investor? The one who funds clean water projects and also builds rockets to go ruin Mars?" "He's not ruining Mars," she said with exasperation. "Be nice." "He's Ethan's friend." Ethan, the groom, was a gentle, freckled human being who counted things for a living. He was a quant, which to me meant he drank coffee like oxygen and did math most people hid from in high school. He'd also once cried when my mother said he ate samosas like a vacuum cleaner, which made me like him very much. That such a man was somehow friends with a tech billionaire was the sort of plot twist life was constantly offering. Unlikely. Slightly ridiculous, but true. "Anyway," Sienna repeated, as if the entire world were a stage for her lines, "Rowan is single. He's gorgeous. Don't let him get bored. Introduce me if you see him. You're getting married in..." I checked the time on my phone and frowned. 40 minutes. "It's harmless to say hello," she said, rolling her eyes. "Network a little, mingle. Billionaires are people too." "Billionaires are barely mammals," I muttered. She swatted my arm with the bouquet. "Stop. You're being negative. I'm being funny. You're being..." "You," she said. And somehow that made everything inside me stutter. The makeup artist chose that moment to fix Sienna's lipstick, so I let the sting dissolve by staring at the orchids. None of them were real, at least not by the strict definition of rooted in dirt. But they were expensive replicas that carried the same shade of ghostly white. The hotel brochure had called this suite Garden in Heaven. I'd thought the name ridiculous when we visited months ago, but now the room felt weirdly suspended. Outside, a quartet was warming up, sending little threads of Vivaldi through the open doors. Staff moved like ballet dancers. Everything was going to plan, which made me, the younger sister and daughter with a history of knocking into the furniture of the world, an unnecessary piece of furniture myself. When I went out onto the terrace to make sure the flower girls had not decided to throw petals over the railing at passing seagulls, I saw him. Not because he shimmered, or because the sun hit him in a special, billionaire-blessed way, but because he moved quietly, as if he were trying to exhale into the space between gestures. He had a slate blue suit that fit him like it knew his bones. His hair was dark and in need of a cut, not on purpose, but because he had forgotten to care. He was taller than Ethan, broader through the shoulders. He had the kind of face artists called handsome when they meant interesting, with a serious mouth. He was listening to my mother. This was impressive. My mother was on her 3rd thermos of tea and her 8th lecture of the morning, this one. I guessed on why the DJ should not, under any circumstances, play anything by Pitbull, and here was Mr. Hale nodding gently, eyes attentive. hands folded like he had a rosary in them. I took the flower girl's deemed fun petals and stacked them neatly in the baskets and texted Sienna, "He's here. He's listening to Mom explain Pitbull. God save him." By the time the ceremony began, I thought perhaps I had imagined the whole conversation about introducing my sister to a billionaire on her wedding day. The idea of it felt too like Sienna, too greedy by halves. I tucked it away with the childhood memory of the time she sawed off my Barbies, hair because the Barbie looked too smug, and then cried until I told Mom I'd done it. When the quartet shifted into the processional, I took my spot. People I'd known since kindergarten turned to watch me float down the aisle and smiled with a sort of pitying pride, as if I were a good dog doing a trick. I smiled back because I am a girl who does tricks, who fetches the safety pin, who untangles the necklace, who remembers the vows because she stayed up the night before, copying them onto cardstock in case the officiant misplaced their notes. Sienna appeared at the doors and the room rippled. She was all the sea creatures at once: mermaid hair, shell crown, whale-bright smile, and the crowd made a sound that was not applause but an intake of breath. My father's face crumpled as he took her arm. Ethan stood there with his hands clenched and his eyes shining, and the day tilted toward good. We are not an easy family. We love loudly and forgive with conditions and hold grudges like heirlooms. But that hour was easy. The vows were clear and sweet. The wind lifted Sienna's veil at the perfect moment. The flower girls, bribed with gummy bears, walked in careful loops and scattered their petals like confetti. The officiant's microphone cut out and everyone leaned in, listening not because the sound system demanded it, but because a good love story deserves quiet. When it was over, when we were suddenly released into the clamor of congratulations and clinks of glass and the orchestra playing Can't Help Falling in Love in strings, my sister was wife and I was relieved. I was also hungry. Weddings are long. Weddings are a marathon in heels. I was finishing my second glass of water and eyeing the table of hors d'oeuvres like a hunter, when Sienna appeared beside me like a pretty ghost. "Don't let him leave," she said. "Let who leave?" "Rowan," she said in a furious whisper. "He was going to the bar and I couldn't get to him." There was a wall of cousins. "Find him." "Be useful?" "Be useful," I repeated. "You know what I mean?" I did. I always know what she means. It's a special language we built in bunk beds and car rides and shared stages. The message under the message. Be useful meant secure the prize. Be useful meant make the world smooth for me so I can glide across it. Be useful meant forget your own hunger. He's a person, I said. He can find the bar, her eyes flashed. Why are you being difficult today? I'm not Maya, she said, voice even as the sea. I needed one thing from you. You needed 1,000 things from me. How dare you, she said. And there it was, the tiny blade. Your problem is you can't stand that it's me. You can't stand that the attention's not on you. You always have to make everything a commentary. Just let me have this. What, you're married? You have this. She smiled, and it was not a nice smile. Jealousy doesn't suit you. It happened so fast. She said it, and then somebody needed her to take a picture with the ring bearers, and she swept away, leaving me with my mouth open and the old familiar heat in my chest. It is a special kind of skill to make someone feel guilty for not arranging your fantasy on your wedding day. It is a skill my sister possesses in spades. I breathed twice, felt the burn pass into something lighter, annoyance, maybe even amusement, and went to find a crab cake. I ate it in 2 bites and the world steadied. If you keep a snack in your bag, you will always have a friend. Good? The voice came to my left. I looked up and almost laughed. There he was. The man everybody wanted, apparently, and who right now was looking like a person who would help you move a couch on a Sunday with only a cup of coffee for payment. The crab cakes? I said, because I panic and say things like a person possessed. Perfect. Suspiciously perfect, he smiled, quick as a match. Suspiciously perfect. That's the hotel's brand, Halcyon, where even the napkins have graduate degrees. And the bar staff speaks 3 languages, all of them sarcasm. We were leaning on opposite ends of a tall cocktail table. The wind had picked up, and the sky had gone the color of an old coin. The ocean seemed close enough to sip. He held a tumbler with something amber in it. I held my thoughts like a drink I wasn't sure I should swallow. I should say something polite, I said. Something like, thank you for funding water filters in places where the maps lie. Or, I admire your commitment to lunar real estate. I don't own the moon, he said. Yet. He laughed. I didn't need to see Sienna to feel her eyes across the deck. The sensation prickled between my shoulder blades. I ignored it. You're Maya, he said then, in the mild way one states a true thing after observing it for a very long time. Maid of honor, sister of the bride. I recognized you from… Yesterday? Yesterday? He sipped his drink. The rehearsal. You were corralling the groomsman and telling the ring bearer he wasn't actually a bear. That kid is committed to the bit, I said. It's inspiring. Rowan, he said, sticking out his hand like a person who still remembers how to make it obvious. Friend of Ethan's, alleged adult. I took his hand because I was not a child. It was a warm, firm hand, the kind that would be useful in a fire. Alleged adult? You, sir, are the reason every TED Talk has a slide about innovation. You're not going to ask me for a selfie? I'm saving my camera roll for the cake. He studied me for a second, not in the way that made your skin crawl, but in the way that made you want to stand up straighter. Do you always talk like this? I think so. It's a coping mechanism. For what? For being alive, I said, and he seemed to understand. We talked about the ocean because it was there. We talked about Ethan because he was ours in different ways now. We talked about the Halcyon's absurd little golf carts that ferried elderly relatives from the parking lot like they were visiting dignitaries. He asked what I did, and I said I worked at the library because I like the hushed gasp people make. A library? As if reading were a vintage hobby like candle making or dueling. He asked what I actually did there, and I told him. I ordered books, hosted story time, taught a class on how to use email to women who had been afraid to try, organized a teen writing club that, shockingly, had to be protected from adults who wanted to make it more productive. So you're a general hero, he said lightly. I'm a person who knows where they hide the good black pens. He nodded solemnly. That is power. Mr. Hale, a voice said behind him, and there was Sienna, triumphant. The photographer had finished with the ring bearers. I thought I could hear tiny trumpets. Sienna, I said, forced into cheer. Congratulations on your ongoing marriage. She gave me a look that told me to die and then blinked it away for public consumption. Rowan, you made it. Wouldn't miss it. Ethan's inside talking to his uncles about baseball, she said. If you want to save him, now is your chance. Baseball's a noble art, he said, deadpan. But I'll do my duty. She laughed and touched his arm for a second too long. A tiny thing. A nothing. Just the kind of nothing that kept me up at night. I excused myself politely. Bathroom, a drink, a necessary small death, and went to the end of the terrace where the wind hit me square in the face. This is the trouble with sisters. You share a childhood and a face and a room and sometimes the wrong tastes. And then you grow up and you're supposed to pretend you're not still jockeying for the same mirror. I wanted Sienna to be happy. I also wanted to protect all the soft parts of the world from her appetites. Those desires rubbed against each other like ropes, burning. I found the bartender and asked for sparkling water with lime and drank it like it contained wisdom. When I turned back, Rowan had moved on. He was inside now, letting Ethan's uncles explain the DH. Sienna was laughing near the band, draped in cousins and friends and the kind of light a bride makes by existing. Somewhere, my mother had found another victim to lecture. Somewhere, Auntie Bina was turning someone else's divorce into a parable. The wedding rolled on, as unstoppable as a train. Dinner was a blur of toasts and clinking and the sort of food that could be a sculpture in a different context. I made my speech and did not cry until the last line about how Sienna had once bullied me into singing karaoke at a bowling alley, and how, in her bossy way, she had always been shoving me toward joy. People laughed and then sighed in the right places. Ethan cried again. Sienna squeezed my hand under the table so hard I almost yelped. Later, as the band started playing songs people my age pretended to hate, the dance floor expanded to swallow the room. The chandelier above us dropped stars onto our shoulders. The DJ, ignoring my mother entirely, slipped Pitbull into a medley and the aunties shrieked with delight. The floor shook with sneakers and heels and laughter and the odd dropped glass. I danced with my father to Brown-Eyed Girl and he whispered, "She looks happy," and I said, "She is," and we didn't say anything else we couldn't take back. When the band called for couples, I stepped off the floor to let the paired people do their complicated private math. The terrace had pulled a ribbon of cool air through the open doors. I followed it out and leaned on the railing. The ocean had gone black. The stars were the only things with edges. I was thinking about libraries. You can take the girl out of the stacks, but you cannot take the stacks out of the girl, when a voice spoke. You looked like you were running through a list just now. Always, I said, not turning. Today's list, take-home favor boxes. Hug sort of racist uncle. Write down the name of those tiny tartlets so I can Google them later. Almond frangipani, he said. Of course you know. I grew up in a bakery. That made me turn. What? My grandmother's in Boise, he said. My hands still know how to whip egg whites. It's the one domestic skill the world forgives me for bragging about. I laughed, surprised into it. Do you ever get tired of the thing where people act like you invented money? All the time. What do you get tired of more? The inventing money thing or the saving the world thing? Saving the world is generally less boring, he said. It has arguments built in. And the money? Money is like weather, he said. People talk about it because it touches everything, even when they're pretending it doesn't. And you, I gestured vaguely. You're a storm system. Sometimes a light drizzle, he said. Sometimes a tornado. Today I am a man at a wedding who wants to dance and is afraid because he has forgotten how. Forgotten how, I said. Like the body is a library book you failed to renew. Exactly. You shouldn't be afraid. This is a wedding. The rules are, be enthusiastic and don't step on toddlers. He nodded as if I'd solved something, and then said, Will you dance with me? He asked it simply, not like he was doing me a favor, and not like I was doing him one either. Just a question, offered to the air. If the air held it, it would be ours. I thought about Sienna. I thought about how she would see this and translate it through the lens we were given, the lens she had polished. My younger sister making a scene, stealing a man's attention, humiliating me on my day. I thought about the inverse, me doing something for the pleasure of it without her, for once as a satellite. I thought about the fact that this dance meant nothing and everything, and that I was allowed to do tiny harmless things that made me feel like a person alive in her own skin. Yes, I said. I will dance with you. The band had slid into one of those old songs people danced to at proms and movies about the 60s. We stepped inside, and the world reassembled into light and sound and bodies in motion. I put my hand on his shoulder, and his hand found my waist the way light finds a window. We moved into the sweep of the music. I have danced with men who try to control you like you're a car they rented. Hands too insistent, steps too sure. He was not like that. He moved as if we were listening to something together. Like we were trying to hear the same thing. You're good, I said, disbelief coloring my voice. I'm disaster adjacent, he said. It helps. I laughed and caught a glimpse of us in the mirror behind the band. Me in the dress that was practical and also right now a sail. Him, serious mouth softened, looking down at me like I was a complicated puzzle he wanted to take his time with. We passed by the table where my mother had finally allowed herself to sit, and she raised her eyebrows so high they almost left her face. The cousins were watching as if this were a television show with a particularly juicy episode. Somewhere in the crowd, I felt Sienna's gaze land sharp as a dart. You okay? He murmured. Always, I said, which was both a lie and not. We danced through one song and then another, and by the third I was almost giddy with the absurdity of it all. A billionaire and a librarian doing a passable interpretation of a waltz, while Auntie Bina filmed us on her phone like she was documenting a rare bird. It was like living inside a headline someone would write with a smirk. It was like stealing a single macaron from a tower and finding it tasted like something I hadn't let myself have in a long time. That's enough, Sienna said. She was suddenly there between songs, her veil like the wake of a boat. Her smile was bright enough to light the rooms in people's heads. Rowan, she said sweetly, you promised me a dance. You and Ethan, both of you vanished. Then I owe you one, he said. Polite. Now, she said, and I felt that tiny blade again. I stepped back, giving them space because space is the only thing you can give when someone wants to take. He followed my eyes for a second, as if confirming that I wouldn't be trampled, then let Sienna take his hand. They danced. She made it a story. She always does. Her body performed a declaration. Look, I am the bride, I am a planet. He was courteous. He met her energy, and he did not shut it down because that is not something you do to a bride. Not unless you want the room's temperature to drop 10 degrees. But watching them, I knew the thing I was not supposed to say. He was dancing with a costume. With a woman who was performing bride the way she'd performed homecoming queen and internship candidate and dutiful daughter when necessary. Some roles fit like a mother tongue, others pinch. I watched my sister in the role that covered her like a glittery net and felt both awe and sorrow. After, she kept him in conversation, the two of them a small stage in the middle of a larger one. I drifted to the edge of the terrace where the night had gone deeper and cooler, and all the high notes of the party softened. The ocean threw itself at the rocks. The stars tried their best. I stood there and watched my breath fog, and I felt very young and very old at once. "Do you hate me?" The voice was hers. She had the ability to find you even when you were hiding in the most visible place. I didn't turn. "I don't hate you." "You're lying," she said, because in some ways she knows me better than I know myself. "I'm tired," I said, "of me. Of doing and doing and doing," I said finally. "I love you and I can't just operate in your shadow forever. It's too cold sometimes." She didn't say anything for a minute. The wind moved her veil. It whispered the word sisters in the kind of accent the sea has. "I didn't mean it," she said. "Earlier. You did when you said it," she sighed. Then she stopped. The way people stop when they realize the script they are about to use won't work on the person they are scripting at. "I know," I said. "All these years," she went on, almost to herself. "It's like, if I don't demand the bigger slice, no one will remember I'm hungry. And then I see you not demanding it and somehow still getting to hold the good thing, and it makes me—" She swallowed. "It makes me crazy." "I was holding a safety pin," I said softly. "It wasn't a good thing. It was a safety pin, I know. Also, he asked me to dance." She nodded, eyes on the water. You. "That's not an explanation," I said, "even though it feels like one." She put a hand on the railing, knuckles white against metal. "I'm scared," she said, of waking up and realizing I did this." She gestured at the dress, the ring, the room, because it was the next line on the checklist, because I'm good at executing plans. And then I looked up at that man, and for a second I saw another path, another stage where I was brighter, maybe. Not because of the money. Don't make that face. Because of the myth. The myth of what? Of being chosen by someone enormous. She rolled her eyes at herself. "It's disgusting, right?" "It's very honest," I said. "I like being big," she said. "And then I get terrified when I realize my bigness requires an audience." I turned then. "Ethan's not an audience," I said. "He's a harbor," she laughed again at herself. "You always have the metaphors." "I have a library," I said. We stood there, shoulder to shoulder, both looking out. The music behind us went on and on. People laughed and clinked, and at the far end of the deck, Auntie Bina was telling a cab driver that her son had been a doctor since he was 5. "I'm not jealous of you," I said finally. "I'm sometimes grieving the idea that I could be as brave as you are about wanting big things." "That's not fair," she said, her voice growing sharp with the instinct to target. "You think I'm brave, and I think you're pure. Like you do good things because you believe they are good. You don't need the world to clap." "I like clapping," I said. "Don't make me a saint. That makes it easier to ignore me." She considered that. "Okay," she said. "You like clapping. You also like not being dragged on stage. Maybe we both could step a little differently." It was for us an apology. I took it and tucked it into the pocket of the day where I kept napkins with cake grease and the tiny speech cards and a spare Band-Aid. It was easier to carry than a grudge. When I found Rowan again, he was sitting at a table near the back, loosening his tie. He looked like a person performing an escape trick. "Don't you have an entourage to rescue you from the throng?" I asked. "They're off duty," he said. "I thought entourages clocked out when you went to sleep." "They unionized." I sat, because my feet hurt, and because the chair was there, and because I wanted to. He looked relieved. "I owe your sister a dance," he said. "You paid it. She wanted more." "She often does," I said. And then, because I did not want to turn my sister into a villain in my own mouth, added, "She's incandescent. It bends people a little." He studied me. "You two are hard on each other in the way people are when they're afraid of what the other one knows. That's very therapist of you." "I have 3, he said without irony. "One for work, one for other work, and one for my soul. which sounds pretentious until you need it. I teach email to 80-year-olds who cry when they send their first message, I said. Nothing is pretentious if you need it. He touched the rim of his glass. It looked like he was going to say something grave. Instead, he said, "Do you want to go outside?" "We are outside," I said. "This is a terrace." "Further," he said. He led me down a small flight of stairs to the hotel garden, which was less garden than curated wilderness. Fairy lights draped the trees like necklaces. The scent of night-blooming jasmine made the air buzzy. We walked down a path that took us away from the music and into a pocket of late summer where it felt like nobody would find us. "Scandalous," I said, "because I am allergic to silence sometimes." "We are within legal hotel limits," he said. I checked. "You're very thorough." "I'm very sued," he said dryly. We sat on a bench that had a commemorative plaque about someone who loved roses in 1983. For a while, we listened to the muffled party and the unmuffled. "Ocean, I read your essay," he said. "What?" "On the library website." "About the teen writing club." "You wrote about the way kids hold their breath when they read their own words out loud for the first time." I recognized that look. I felt myself blush in the half-dark. "You read the library website?" "I invest in community centers," he said. "Libraries are the best ones. I like to hear from the people who run them. I don't always announce myself because then people start performing philanthropy back at me. I prefer authenticity. I'm not a performance," I said, stung and proud and embarrassed all at once. "I know," he said. "That's why I asked you to dance." I should have said, "That was petty." I should have said, "My sister wanted your attention." I should have said, "Are you playing games?" Instead, I said, "Okay," because it was the truest word available. "You wrote that when you were a kid you used to crawl under your blanket with a flashlight to read at night," he went on. "And that books felt like secret friends." "I know that girl. I'm still that girl," I said. "I'm the boy who took apart his grandmother's stand mixer because he wanted to know how the gears made the whisk spin," he said. "Then I couldn't put it back together and I cried for a week. She made me pancakes anyway with a fork." "Love," I said simply. "Love," he agreed. People mistake the big gestures for love. But the fork pancakes are the whole sermon. We were quiet again. A moth hovered near the fairy lights like it was deciding whether to become a star. "Tell me something you want," he said. I almost laughed. It is a complicated question, asking a woman to name desires in a world that punishes certain answers. But it was also a test I had been weary of failing by answering with safety pins. "I want," I said, slow, "the teen writing club to have a budget that doesn't require me to bake sales into every month. I want to pay the poet who came last week to teach us how to write a line that flips like a coin. I want the library to be open on Sundays, so the kids whose parents work double shifts have somewhere to go." "I can write a check," he said, not as a brag, but as one of the facts of his weather system. "I know," I said, "but I want to name it to a person, not an ATM." "Consider it named to me," he said. "Now you," I said. "Tell me something you want that money can't—" "Weather." He took a long time. I waited. "The night filled in our patience. I want to not be—" "The story," he said finally. "I want to live a day where I am not a headline, a symbol, a proxy for someone's argument about the world. I want to be able to sit on a bench with a person and not be playing a role in their personal folklore." "I'm not writing you a folktale," I said. He smiled. "You're writing me into a bench. Into a garden," I said. "With jasmine." "And a moth," he added. "And a bar in Boise where your grandmother made pancake batter with a fork while you cried," I said. "That bar was the countertop," he said. "But close enough." He looked at me then in a way that made the hairs rise on my arms. Not predatory, not even romantic yet. More like recognition. Like we had arrived at the same page. "I don't know what this is," he said softly. "I just know I'd like to talk to you when it's not your sister's wedding." "That's a low bar," I said, but my voice shook a little. "And I know that the optics will be ugly," he said. "Because the world eats women when they step out of line, and the line here would be, her sister danced with a rich man at the reception and then—" He didn't finish the sentence because it didn't need finishing. "We danced," I said. "We are now sitting. Next, perhaps we will compare lists of favorite pens. Pilot G2, he said. Black. 07, I said, and he looked delighted. I'm not trying to make trouble, he said, sobering. For you or for your sister? I'm not reckless in other people's homes. I know, I said. I also know that my sister is complicated and bright and sometimes burns what she loves because it lets her feel the heat. She'll be fine, I added. Not for him, but for me. Is Ethan? He asked. Ethan is a harbor, I said. He's the person who buys 2 pairs of gloves so he can keep one in your coat pocket and one in his, just in case. He'll hold. He'll also tell her when she's stepping into traffic. We sat for another minute, the kind that expands to hold everything the day couldn't. When we stood, the party was cresting again. The DJ had pulled in all the uncles and aunties with a Bhangra remix that threatened to collapse the floor. I saw my mother dancing with the bartender, and I forgave her Bluetooth earpiece sins in an instant. I saw Ethan with his tie on his head like a cartoon. I saw Sienna watching him with softness. I could breathe again. In the foyer, by the foot of the stairs, we stopped. He took out a small card. It was not expensive, and it did not make a statement about design. It had a phone number and an email and a name that looked oddly bare in this place, as if he'd taken his last name off to blend in and forgotten to put it back. He wrote his personal number on the back and a tiny note, pancakes. For the budget and the teenagers, he said. And for pancakes. I'll send you a proposal, I said, because if you give a librarian an inch, she will make you a folder. Send me a story, he said. Proposal after. I slid the card into my bag like it was a flag. I wasn't foolish enough to pretend I wasn't thrilled. I also wasn't foolish enough to pretend this was a fairy tale that would simply unfold in my favor because the man was rich and I was charming. I am not Cinderella. I have shoes I can run in. I am a girl with her own keys. Back on the dance floor, Sienna found me and pulled me into a circle of girls. She laughed and screamed the lyrics and raised our hands until the song insisted we drop them like hot coals. We danced until our hair came loose and our earrings hurt and our sides ached with joy. If jealousy had been a guest at this wedding, she was drunk now and asleep under a table. When things wound down and the sparklers came out, we made an aisle for the couple. The photographer barked instructions. The hotel staff kept a fire extinguisher nearby. Ethan and Sienna ran through the glittering tunnel toward their car, and I watched my sister's face as she looked forward and not once over her shoulder. She was choosing in real time the life she wanted. It was not myth. It was canopy and cake, and a man who would thaw the windshield for her on cold mornings. It was, I decided, enough. After, I took off my shoes and walked out onto the sand below the terrace. The night was cold and clear and very, very sharp. The wind slid its hands up my dress, and I tucked my knees into my chest on a flat rock and watched the dark water slam itself again and again at the world. I was a small thing and I was a person. Both felt like power. Footsteps crunched behind me and then stopped. He sat without asking. He had learned that asking too many times is a kind of refusal. You're going to freeze, he said. I have a high tolerance for beautiful weather, I said. We did the thing people do when they are at the beginning of something and do not want to scare it. We talked about nothing that was also everything. He told me about Idaho skies so big they could swallow you. I told him about the time the library roof leaked and we had to put trash cans under the poetry section. He laughed like a boy. I laughed like a person released from custody. When he asked if he could walk me to my car later, I said yes. When he didn't ask for anything else, I breathed again. At the valet, we stood in the weird liminal space between party and road. He put his hands in his pockets like a teenager who didn't know what to do with his body. I put mine under my arms because I was cold. The valet pulled up my ridiculous little hatchback and I felt, unexpectedly, proud of it. It was paid off. It was mine. It transported several dozen children's books every week and had glitter in the mats from some party whose details I had erased and whose souvenirs remained. Don't let me become a myth, he said. Don't let me become a symbol. I replied. I won't, he said. Me either, I said. When he leaned in, he did not kiss me. He kissed the air near my hair, a respectful ellipse. It made me want to cry and laugh at once. It made the column of my neck feel like a lit candle. Good night, Maya, he said. Good night, Rowan, I said. Driving home, I turned off the radio and let silence be loud. I recited in my head the names of all the teens in writing club and the things they would write if given paper and a room and a door that locked. I planned the email I'd send him with bookish care. I called it Fork Pancakes and Poetry, and I smiled in the dark at my own audacity. I imagined his grandmother's hands in flour. I imagined the check, and then, more importantly, the door opening on a Sunday. At a red light, I considered my sister. We will always be two sides of the same coin. We will always demand different kinds of attention and think ourselves braver for demanding it. We will always be a little jealous and a little exhausted by the person who shares our face. But I thought of her running through sparklers toward the car that would take her to the hotel, that would take her to the morning, that would take her to a life with Ethan, who would buy 2 gloves. I thought of the way her hand had squeezed mine under the speech cards. I thought of her saying I'm scared and not dying of the admission. When I got home, my apartment smelled like the lemon cleaner I'd used the night before because I had panicked and cleaned at midnight in case somebody came over, a thing that never happens. I hung the dress on the back of a chair and put the safety pins back in their tin. I took the little card out of my bag and put it on my kitchen table, and next to it I put a pen that wrote like a secret. I washed my face, and when I looked in the mirror again, the skin was still me. The eyes were still mine. The mouth I always thought of as too wide was just a mouth. I did not look like a person who had danced with a myth. I looked like a person who had danced with a man and then sat on a bench and told him the truth. The next morning I woke up and made pancakes with a fork, and they were lumpy and perfect and tasted like something from 1983. Months later, in a room with fluorescent lighting and bad circulation, I watched a dozen teenagers read their work aloud on a Sunday. Their faces did the thing faces do when courage asks them to step forward, and their voices shook and then steadied, and the words slid into the air and became furniture. The grant had come through, sure, but that wasn't the thing I wanted to tell you. The thing is, they were there, inside the library on a Sunday, and a girl in a hoodie read a poem about the way her mother's hands smelled like cumin, and a boy in a baseball cap wrote a story about a dragon who worked at a pharmacy and forgot who he was. And a non-binary kid who had been almost silent for weeks read a line that made me feel like the sea had squeezed my ribs. After, I checked my phone and had 2 messages. One was a photo from Sienna. She and Ethan were on a hiking trail somewhere green. She was wearing no makeup and a sweatshirt that said, "Get lost," and he was looking at her like she was a campsite and a view and a hot thermos of coffee at sunrise. The caption read, "We're good. How are you?" The other message was a link to a video of a grandmother flipping pancakes with a fork in black and white, and then a single line, "Boise someday?" I typed yes, and then, because I am not a myth, added, "But only if we stop at the library." He texted back, "Weather permitting." When the teens had gone and the room smelled like pencil shavings and excitement, I sat at the desk and wrote a letter to the future. It was not long. It said, "Today I danced with nobody and everybody. Today I held open a door. Today I did not collapse into smallness. Today I let the world be big without needing all of it to look at me. When I signed my name, I did not apologize for its letters. Years will come with their own weather. Some will be hurricanes. Some will be days of thin, cold rain. Some will be heat that makes everybody cruel. I cannot predict them. I can, however, tell you this. At my sister's wedding, she called me jealous, and I danced with the billionaire she tried to flirt with. And what I took home was not a story about winning, or even a man. What I took home was the shape my body makes when it moves toward what matters. A room with kids and words. A bench with jasmine. A sister running through sparklers. A man whose mouth is serious, and who knows that a fork makes terrible pancakes unless love holds the handle. I am young, and I am a woman, and I am not a symbol, and I am not an audience, and I am no one's myth. I am a librarian with a good pen and a list, and sometimes my list includes dancing. Sometimes it includes telling the truth. Often, recently, it includes pancakes. When I told Sienna all of this, months later, over coffee that had gone cold because we were talking too hard, she raised an eyebrow and said, "So you're saying I was right? You are jealous." "Constantly," I said. "And you are too." She laughed and reached across the table and smudged sugar from my lip with her thumb. "I love you, idiot. I love you, menace," I said. We were for once on the same page. Not the identical sentence, God forbid, but the same leaf of paper. It felt like weather permitting. It felt like a harbor on a day when the water wanted to be kind. It felt like a fork in flour, making something out of eggs and air and whatever we had left. And if you're here because you heard only the first line of the story and not the rest, if you came for the jealous sister and the billionaire. Dance, well, we did, and we danced well. But the best part, the part I will not whisper when I am old, is this. The next morning I ate pancakes, and then I opened a door on a Sunday, and a few kids walked through. And the world briefly applauded where it mattered most, which is to say, inside my chest. The end.